Now, with DI, you see that in this case, we will have banana listener, we have BananaCaller. If I will go in, let's just take a look at banana listener. Don't worry about this so much for now, all of these attributes here, but we see that here we have another script called BananaImage Worker. We are actually never looking for this anywhere, like not looking in the scene, not a static variable. And then this toggles image, and this banana is banana image is enabled, image banana here, right? Why this is like that, we'll cover in a moment. Okay, and then we have BananaCaller. BananaCaller also has this attribute here, and then it goes through kind of like a constructor. Remember what I said about C#, that it's different than Unity C#. And during the awake phase, Zenject parses through the hierarchy, and then it invokes this method. Now, this method then takes this class that we haven't gotten into, BananaImage Worker, and it defines this class that we have in the class scope, and then pressing space, we see that it invokes this function, summon banana. Summon banana does the same thing as we had before, turns on the banana, but we see that summon banana does not exist here, right? Because we're working with BananaImage Worker. Before we go off, I do want to kind of go back and take a look at what's happening here. What am I, why am I just not declaring this in say the start function, or getting this component? I could just get component of the image, or I could use shotgun debugging to make sure this component is present. The reason that I'm doing this is specifically because of script execution order. If I set everything up in the awake phase, it might fire before, or it might fire after the object itself is being has been instantiated. Once that's done, it might try to get a reference to an object which may not have yet been assigned. So this is called an accessor. I'm using when this object itself is being referenced, it immediately goes through this little function, and it asks, hey, this other object, in this case, underscore image banana, is nothing there? If nothing is there, then assign this get component image, and then just return it to us. This is dirt cheap, seeing if an object actually exists in the memory buffer, and then we can run this nice little function. So once again, reasoning, script execution order. Detour over, let's take a look at BananaImage Worker and see what that's all about. Okay, so here we have an event, and here we have a method that fires off this event. An event, this action, which is an anonymous function. It's just a function that can itself be passed off, that other events can then listen to once sent through an event, and it can pass off parameters. Once again, may be confusing, maybe not be confusing. I can't please everyone. If you have no idea what I just said, leave it in the comments, and then I will go through and help to get you to understand. So we've got this method. It fires off this event, which has a boolean on banana summon, that the caller, got a little too passionate there. Is then invoking. Banana listener, we see, also subscribes to it, and this is the way that you use in order to invoke this function, toggle image, and then it enables the banana. Another thing to say about specifically this BananaImage Worker, and maybe some of you will, upon watching this, and immediately think of, can't I do this through just regular static C# events and delegates? And the answer in this case is a definite yes. Now you will have to find BananaImage Worker somehow in order to actually trigger this. So that presents a problem, but I mean, you could get around doing this. And this is, I would say that this is a great method if you're going to be writing like third-party libraries, because you don't want to have it rely on, some sort of third-party package like Zenject. And if you want to release it on the asset store or somewhere else where your code is itself going to be actively using it. So static events and delegates, which can be accessed by other methods, are a pretty good alternative to DI. But let's leave that on the side. At this point, let's continue moving. We've got one more thing to cover here, which is called the context. What is that? Well, in just DI in general, you will have something called a composition root. Without it, typically you have object A communicates to object B and tells object B to do stuff. Now, let's say you've put together a singleton, and now object A communicates to a singleton, B subscribes to an event as a singleton, and B does stuff. Now we've got two of these objects tied together, but what if we have more than two? If we have more than two, and if we choose to use DI, what happens is that all of these objects are moved to bound to a composition root. And a composition root then will say this object can be addressed, and all of the other objects can say they can communicate with an object that has been bound to that composition root. So everything is happening on the top hierarchy, and we can take that entire stack and trace it. So object A has communicated with a composition root and tells it to do something within a class that has been bound. Object B also subscribes to that event and saying that this thing is there, this object has been bound. What does it mean to bind an object? Well, this happens in the installer. If we see here, we've got a prefab, and this prefab contains this script. In the scene context, we have these prefab installers. And if I go in here, this is all that there is. We see that it doesn't inherit from MonoBehavior, but it doesn't matter. MonoBehavior is still the base class, and that it uses the Zenject library. And then we have this container bind BananaImage Worker as single. So this then takes this object and it binds it as a singleton. So it's not a singleton itself, but it can be addressed as such. So we don't have this like huge list of global singletons that exist within the scene. And we can instead communicate to just one single object, which that other objects can subscribe to without having to look for it within the scene. Now, I know this may seem like an excessive boilerplate to do this, but because this project, as I mentioned before, is meant to be as minimal as possible, I'll say that this sort of thing, this sort of method of this sort of technique is something that may be useful in creating such things as palettes. So like say you're doing some sort of like furniture arrangement app with AR Core. You've got like 40 different tiles. Each tile of linoleum costs X amount of money, and has also has a price to it, or a name to it. So then you've got 40 different colors that can be associated with these tiles, can also be changed. This is a massive amount of information, for you to drag and drop and to have other scripts reference. So an alternative of doing that is to create one object that will just parse an existing script, and will take all of the prefabs and just keep it in memory. and then you don't have to keep it within the scene. It can happen once, other scenes can load, and that object you can then reference within Zenject no matter where you go. I realized this is quite a bit, and it took me some time for DI to really click, but I assure you, go through this and you'll never be the same again. If you pay for your time for this now, the return on investment will be, for one, less time spent and less nerves burned trying to track down bugs. So this is an investment of spending time now in order for you not to pay it off in the future with other methods that can be more rigid and brittle. Besides, next lesson we're going to go over on one of my absolute favorite ways to address DI called signals.